The show Cowboy Bebop takes place in space in the distant future. The show follows two bounty hunters, Spike and Jet Black, and they comb the galaxy looking for bounties on their ship, the Bebop. We get introduced to both as they're tracking down a bounty of a guy named Tanaka. He's taking a bunch of hostages in a space casino. They end up destroying the casino pretty good, but they do end up taking Tanaka in alive, which is the most important part for bounties. If it's dead, you don't get anything. Both Spike and Jet Black then head to Europa because they want to turn him in. And this is a big one. They're hoping that the bounty actually went up because they could use the money. Especially Jet Black. He needs to get his daughter a birthday present, and it would be nice to actually be in the black instead of the red for once. So they head to Europa to turn Tanaka in. Unfortunately for both of them, when they do turn him in, it's not exactly the bounty they were hoping for. Tanaka's bounty was $1.5 million, but after you take out all the taxes and fees, they only get $100,000. That's not nearly enough. It's basically the equivalent of breaking even for them after they waste the gas. As Jet Black is leaving the police station, he runs into a cop that he knows named Chalmers. Though they don't have the best relationship. Guess Chalmers kind of had a thing with Jet Black's ex-wife while they were still together. But as Jet Black is trying to get out of the conversation, Chalmers pulls him aside and says, "Hey, I actually have a bounty for you. It's not even listed yet." Jet Black asks him, "Why are you giving it to me?" And Chalmers says, "Personally, I wouldn't cross the street to piss on you if you were on fire, but your ex-wife asked me to throw you a bone every once in a while, so here it is." So Jet Black heads back to the Bebop to give Spike the bad news about the bounty haul. They start kind of pointing fingers on why they got so little, blaming each other for the destruction of the casino that they have to pay for. They quickly, though, start laughing about the situation, and Jet Black shows him the latest bounty that Chalmers gave him. It's a guy named Asimov Solensen. He shot up a bar in New Tijuana. And shot up a bar is one way to put it. What Jet Black and Spike don't know is this guy walked into the bar with his pregnant girlfriend, and he was trying to do a drug deal, although the guy didn't actually believe that the drug he had, something called red eye, was actually what it was. He needed proof. So Solensen decided to inject himself with it. And unfortunately for everybody in the bar, the red eye that Solensen had was legit, but it also put him in an absolute rage. And as he was trying to get money for all of it, these guys showed up from something called the Syndicate, and they were looking for it because it turns out Solensen stole it from them. Although under the influence of red eye, Solensen was able to kill all of them except one who was able to get away. Now, Jet Black and Spike don't know the whole story. They just think this is a guy who's worth $2.5 million who just shot up a bar. And Spike doesn't even want to take it. He doesn't want to head to New Tijuana because the last time he was there, he got stabbed while getting a churro. But Jet Black puts his foot down and says, "We're taking this." Jet Black reminds him that it's his ship, and he also has to get his daughter a birthday present. It's easy money. So the two head to New Tijuana. Jet Black heads to the bar that was shot up. And as he's talking to the barkeeper who was there, wasn't killed, the barkeeper lets him know that, yeah, the guy came in and the Syndicate showed up and he killed all of them. All except one. But the barkeeper also lets Jet Black know that there was somebody else, a woman with purple hair, who was asking about the same couple. Spike, however, has been able to locate the couple with the help of three guys who are playing dominoes. They let Spike know, "Yeah, I've seen Sorensen. He stumbled into a hospital, and the hospital was literally right behind them." Sorensen had to go there to get patched up because he did take bullets. But under the influence of red eye, it didn't even faze him. At least not until the stuff wore off. So Spike starts looking around, and that's when he sees Sorensen's girlfriend. He goes over, lights her a cigarette, starts chatting her up, the whole time waiting for Sorensen to show up so he can take him in. As they start talking about how they got to Tijuana, starting a new life, love, all that crap, Spike hears a gun get cocked behind him, and then he feels it on the back of his neck. And it ends up being that same woman with purple hair. Her name is Faye Valentine. She's a bounty hunter, and she tells Spike that he needs to piss off because he's talking to her bounty. Spike tells her, though, that he's not here for her, he's here for her boyfriend. But then he asks, why would anyone care about her? There's no bounty for her. And Valentine says, well, I care about her because Ellis Montgomery does. And if Ellis Montgomery cares about her, then that means that this pregnant woman in front of him is Katarina Montgomery, his daughter. This guy's really powerful, really rich, and immediately Katarina starts begging them not to take her in. Spike tells Faye to walk away, and she kindly reminds him that she's the one with the gun. And that's when Spike reverses it on her and gets it away from her. But the gun goes off, and that alerts Solensen that there's something going on outside. When he looks outside, he sees both Spike and Valentine fighting as his girlfriend is terrified. So as those two duke it out, it gives Katarina enough time to actually pick up Solensen and get the hell out of there. And while Valentine is really pissed off to see the two get away, she's even more pissed off when she turns around and Spike has a gun pointed at her. Spike takes her back to the Bebop and locks her up. When Jet Black arrives back at the ship, he hears somebody locked up in the bathroom, and he asks Spike, who the hell is that? So Spike takes him over and introduces him to Faye Valentine. After Faye and Jet Black exchange pleasantries, Jet Black informs Spike on the whole syndicate problem. Spike then tells Jet Black about Katarina Montgomery, and the two start piecing this story together about how Asimov was a part of the syndicate, but he fell in love with this girl, decided to start a new life, and stole the Red Eye to sell it and form that new life together. And Spike has a pretty good idea of where they're going. He's pretty convinced they're going to Mars because it's something Katarina had mentioned. Jet Black tells him, we got to get to them before the syndicate does. This planet is crawling with them. But Spike says, whoa, you're the one who always says we have to play by the rules here. We've always said if it's the syndicate, we walk away. Jet Black gets pretty pissed off, reminding Spike that he's doing this to get a present for his daughter's birthday, but Spike tells him, this isn't going to get us paid, this is going to get us dead. Jet Black completely ignores that, telling him, they're going to Mars, they're going to need a ship, and I have a pretty good idea where they're going to get that from. So he takes off, and Spike reluctantly follows suit. Faye is locked up in the bathroom the entire time. As the two guys head off to the airport to try to rendezvous with Katarina and Sorensen, Faye is able to lockpick her way out of the bathroom. And since she overheard the conversation, she also has a pretty good idea of where they're going. Spike and Jet Black, though, get to the airport first, and it's just as Jet Black had predicted. There's Sorensen and Katarina trying to escape. Spike tries to talk Sorensen down, saying that this isn't going to end well for them, but it can end well for Katarina. If Sorensen comes in easy, they'll let Katarina go. Sorensen even considers it, but ultimately deciding, no deal. Spike ends up beating Sorensen up quite a bit, and Sorensen frantically tries to grab some red eye to inject it, which he does. But as he starts going into that fit of rage, the syndicates show up. And suddenly, Jet Black, Sorensen, and Spike stop fighting each other because they're getting shot at by a lot of syndicate members. And one of the stray bullets ends up hitting Katarina, but it hits her in the stomach. And that's when you find out that Katarina actually isn't pregnant. What she was hiding was a bunch of red eye, the red eye that was stolen from the syndicate. Nobody even seems to notice because of all of the commotion that's going on around them. Sorensen helps Katarina scoop up the red eye and get her out of the gunfire. Now, Spike is doing a great job of one by one taking out all of the syndicate members. He gets to who he thinks is the last syndicate member, and that guy actually recognizes him. He looks up at Spike and says, Fearless, it's not possible. You're dead. We killed you. And Spike says, yeah, you did, and I want to keep it that way, Chivo. And then he kills him. But that actually wasn't the last member of the syndicate. There was one more member who was hiding. It's the same guy that got away from Sorensen. Since he's outnumbered, he decides to hunker down and wait for everybody to leave. And speaking of Sorensen, he's busy trying to kill Jet Black. Jet Black is only saved when somebody shoots Sorensen, and that somebody is Faye Valentine, who's finally arrived. Both Faye and Spike rush to Jet Black to see how he's doing, as Katarina and Sorensen get in a ship and take off. But when Spike sees that, he gets in his own ship and follows after them. Katarina is very relieved. She thinks she's on her way to Mars. But when she looks over, Sorensen is dead. And when her ship gets closer and closer to the portal that's going to take them to Mars, they actually get ordered to stop. They hear over the intercom system that they need to turn away from the gate or they'll be fired upon. But Katarina doesn't turn away. At this point, Spike is caught up to her, and he's even pleading for her to turn away, but she doesn't. She goes full steam ahead towards the gate, and she gets lit up and dies. And one of the reasons why Spike wanted to help her so bad was because Katarina reminded him of somebody. Somebody he has visions of with a rose tattoo. A woman that clearly he had a relationship with, but something went wrong. Seems to be syndicate related. And speaking of the syndicate, that one lone survivor ended up returning to his boss. This guy is hunkered down in a space fish market. And it's a guy named Vicious who demands to know where the red eye is. But this poor crony has to explain that he doesn't have it. There were these bounty hunters, who they call cowboys, and the whole thing went to shit. He does tell Vicious that this one bounty hunter killed all 12 of the guys, including Chivo. And he overheard Chivo call him Fearless, but that can't be it because they killed Fearless. Because the situation was so botched, Vicious ends up killing this guy. And he tells two other cronies, if that truly was Fearless, find him and bring me his head. He then goes in another room where there's a female who asks, everything okay? And Vicious says, yeah, it's old business, my love. But that female is the same girl from Spike's dreams. The same girl with the rose tattoo. In episode 2, Spike and Jet Black are on the planet Pluto looking for a big bounty. Guy's been blowing up buildings with a teddy bear, and this could be the big bounty that they've been looking for. Unfortunately, they don't have many leads. They basically have to go to buildings they think he's going to blow up and just kind of scope out some sketchy individuals. The first place they check out is a church. But when Spike heads to the bathroom, Jet Black starts talking to Spike through the earpiece that he has, and Spike's kind of complaining about the fact that they're looking for a needle in a haystack. But then a sketchy individual ends up walking into the bathroom. Spike ends up turning off his earpiece, and his hunch was right. This guy attacks him. He's clearly syndicate trained, and Spike ends up taking him out. Unfortunately, though, Spike ended up missing all the commotion outside of the bathroom. Jet Black ended up seeing a sketchy individual, and when he grabbed his hand, he noticed that he did in fact have a teddy bear bomb. But when Jet Black ended up going to apprehend him, turned out the hand was fake. The whole time, Jet Black is screaming for Spike's help, but he's not getting it because Spike can't hear him. Jet Black ends up running out of the church, and that's when Teddy Bear Boy ends up hitting him over the head and knocking him pretty woozy. Right before he passes out, Jet Black sees Teddy Bear Boy run off. When they both reconvene back at the Bebop, Jet Black is giving Spike a lot of crap for not responding and having his back. It's not a total loss, though. Jet Black was able to grab the hand, so they have something they can go on. Jet Black figures they could use the hand and analyze it and look for traces of explosives. At least then they'll have a lead. Spike ends up asking him, how long is this going to take? And Jet Black says, a couple hours. And Spike tells him, I'm going to go get some noodles. Jet Black tells him, you're not going anywhere. We have to dissect this manifesto, figure out if we can get anything out of it. But Spike isn't interested in any of that. He ends up throwing the manifesto down and leaving to go get some, quote, noodles. He hops in his ship, the Swordfish, disables the tracking beacon, and flies off. But he's not headed to get noodles. He ends up heading to a nightclub called Anna's, and it's run by, this is going to shock you here, it's run by a woman named Anna. Very creative. And Anna's a little bit like Lord Varys from Game of Thrones. She has little birdies, but instead of children, she's just got security cameras. She hears all, she seems to know all, because Anna's is a place that a lot of people go to. Regular people, sketchy people, syndicate people, everybody. And it's a place that Spike clearly went to a lot when he was a part of the syndicate. He ends up going up to Anna's office and waiting for her to arrive. And when she does, it kind of startles her because she had no idea that he was even alive. This is the first time she's seeing him in a while. She tells him, they told me you were dead. And he walks up and tells her, I'm okay. But she ends up slapping him, yelling at him that he let her believe that he was dead for 3 years. He tries to explain, they tried to kill me. And she says, of course they did. Nobody leaves the syndicate. They end up enjoying a drink, and then she asks the question, what brings you back? He tells her that a week ago, he got mixed up in a bounty, and the syndicate was involved, and she can't believe that he's become a cowboy. She starts cracking up because she can't believe that he took a job putting himself in danger. She then asks, though, did you leave any loose ends? And he says, no, I didn't think so. Until today, I was attacked by somebody who was clearly syndicate trained. It wouldn't be the first time an old bounty has come after me, but this guy was somebody they send to take care of a problem. She then asks him, why did you come to me? He says, so you can do what you do best and listen. Spike then gets a phone call from Jet Black. He's wondering where the hell he is. Jet Black did try to use the tracker, but it was disabled. And Jet Black just feels like he's doing all of the work on this bounty as Spike goes out and gets, quote, noodles. So Spike has to tell Anna, I gotta go. My partner's calling me. And she can't believe that, one, he has a partner. But then when she finds out that Spike hasn't told Jet Black who he used to be, that's an even bigger surprise. Spike explains, though, that Jet Black wouldn't understand. He's an ex-cop. He hated syndicate folk. And Anna feels like Spike should at the very least give Jet Black a chance to make that decision for himself. Spike, though, is planning on keeping the secret to himself for now. Right before he leaves Anna's, he sees a picture of that woman from his dreams. Turns out she's a singer. She's sung at Anna's, and her name is Julia. And Spike asks, is she happy? And Anna gives him the rundown that she's been married to Vicious for a few years, and yeah, she is indeed happy. He then heads for the door, and Anna tells him, if I hear anything, I'll reach out to you in the usual way. Spike ends up heading back to the Bebop, and Jet Black fills him in on everything that was analyzed from the hand. They then head off to a construction site because Jet Black figures this is where the bomber must be. It's the one place where they're using a large amount of the substance that was found on the hand that would be explosive. They start talking to the foreman about it, but then they quickly start fighting over how Spike left him to go get noodles. The foreman actually has to be like, yo, I've seen the good cop, bad cop thing before, but I've never seen the bad cop, asshole cop thing. Spike corrects him and says, we're not cops, we're cowboys, and we're not opposed to cutting you in on the profits. Foreman tells him, I'm not opposed to making some extra money, but fortunately there's been nothing missing from our stash. I check it every night. If you don't believe me, go talk to our supplies guy, Theodore. He'll tell you. but Spike asks him, you mean to tell me your supply guy is nicknamed Teddy? That's too much of a coincidence. So they go to track down the supplies guy. They end up breaking into his place, but as they walk through it, it's pretty booby-trapped. Spike wants to go to the cockpit, but Jet Black says, no, let's go to the hull. So they start walking towards the hull. The whole time, they're trying to avoid booby traps that could potentially blow the place up. When they get to one part of the ship, Spike ends up noticing that there's a cup of noodles, so he's immediately distracted. But he also notices that it's still warm, which means that Teddy couldn't have gotten far. And that's when the ship starts moving. Spike yells at Jet Black, I told you we should have gone to the cockpit, so that's where they head. And it doesn't take long for the ship to make it out of orbit. It also doesn't take long for them to reach the cockpit, but when they look in, no one's there. And that's probably a good thing, because the ship gets hit with a bunch of space debris that ends up destroying the cockpit. Now Jet Black and Spike have a bigger issue. They need to get off this ship, a ship that they can't steer, so they need to look for an escape pod. They once again start squabbling, and that's when Jet Black brings up the fact that his tracking device was turned off, and that's weird. You don't turn your tracking device off for noodles. Spike takes offense to the fact that he was being tracked, but Jet Black reminds him, we're partners, man. You don't just abandon your partner. During the argument, Jet Black ends up stepping on a booby trap. And about a second later, a guy walks in who's really only wearing a bomb and a bear head costume. Think we found our bomber. He starts talking to them, but they can't understand him because he's wearing that teddy bear costume. They are able to discern most of his message. It basically is, he's going to blow them sky high if they don't get the Ichabod. What he actually means is escape pod, but they haven't figured that out yet. With Jet Black kind of immobilized, it's up to Spike to disarm this guy, and he is able to. He ends up knocking him out, and shortly after he realizes, oh, he was talking about an escape pod. Now the question is, who actually takes it? Jet Black ends up saying, you take it. But before he can actually make a case, Spike ends up pushing him off the booby trap and standing on it himself. He says to Jet Black, I would probably get distracted and stop at a bar or for noodles or something, so you take it. And Jet Black promises that he'll be back for him. Right before Jet Black does hop in the escape pod, though, Spike says, there's one more thing I gotta tell you. And you think that it might be about his syndicate background, but he chickens out. Just saying, can you bring me those noodles that were sitting over there? And then finally, we haven't talked about Vicious. He's trying to sleep when he gets a knock at the door, and it's a bunch of syndicate members, although they're not there for a wellness check. They tell Vicious the elders would like a word. They hook up a device that allows Vicious to talk to the elders, who are probably on another planet, but it sets up a hologram. And the elders yell at Vicious for trying to go behind their backs and sell Red Eye. Vicious plays it off like, well, I was doing it to up our profits and help your business, but they're not buying that. They want a show of loyalty from Vicious. So they have the syndicate members that they sent to Vicious's place hand him a gun, and they demand that he pull the trigger and kill Julia. He begs them, take something else, my finger, anything, but they're steadfast. No, you have to kill Julia. And after some screaming and yelling, eventually he does in fact pull the trigger. Luckily for Julia, it wasn't loaded. And the elder tells him, don't make us question your loyalty again. But as you can imagine, this kind of puts a rift in the relationship between Vicious and Julia. You tend to get upset when your significant other pulls the trigger at your head, even if it's not loaded. Vicious tells her, I knew it wasn't loaded, the weight was off, but Julia doesn't buy that. She looks up at him and says, make sure the gun's loaded next time. I mean, you promised to keep me safe from the elders, especially him. We're assuming it's the one that ordered the kill. She continues to yell at Vicious, telling him, I see now you'll always be in the shadows, so you may as well put a bullet in me now, because you will never be man enough to stand up for yourself. And that's when Vicious chokes her. He yells at her, don't you ever tell me I'm not man enough, and then he throws her on the ground. He goes to blow off some steam, and he does that at Anna's, and Anna is keeping a close watch on all the security camera footage, so when she sees Vicious, she turns that knob up, and she overhears a conversation between Vicious and some other syndicate members, and they tell Vicious that the hitman that they sent to get Fearless ended up dead, and that enrages Vicious even more. We heard from Anna in episode 2 that if she needed to communicate with Spike, she would do so, quote, the usual way, and the usual way is through a mobile sushi truck. On the planet Mars, Spike ends up walking up to the guy in the sushi truck, giving him a code word, and he hands him a pair of chopsticks with the wrapping around it. And when you unwrap them, that's where Anna's message is. And the message is, Vicious knows. Spike also knows that Vicious works in a fish market. He looks down and sees the box, and turns out this guy gets his fish from that fish market. So Spike tells the guy, I need to know next time you pick up your fish if Vicious still does his business out of there. Initially, the guy doesn't want to do it. He doesn't want any trouble, but Spike ends up flashing him some cash, and the guy ends up agreeing to it. He says to Spike, I'm going to pick up a fresh batch in a few hours, and I'll find you. Spike then heads back to the Bebop, where Jet Black is stressed out. He's having trouble getting this must-have doll for his daughter Kimmy's birthday, and her birthday is quickly coming up. We're talking in a couple days. He's called up every single toy store. They're all sold out. He feels like he's doomed to show up at the birthday without the one thing she wants. He's so stressed out, he says, all right, let's get off this rock. But Spike can't let that happen. He's still waiting to hear from the sushi guy. So he says to Jet Black, if you need some money, need a doll, let's just get a bounty. And he quickly finds one, and it's for a lot of money. $15 million. One of the reasons why it's so much money is because of the fact that this guy's wanted for murder and all the victims are wealthy. So Jet Black ends up saying, sure, why not? He notices that the picture is from a security camera, and he says, we're going to need Woodcock. And he ends up calling this Woodcock up. She ends up hologramming in, and she's probably in her 60s, but don't tell her that. She thinks she's in her 30s. Right off the bat, she starts hitting on Jet Black hard. After Jet Black tries to get her back on the mission at hand, she tells him, I've had clients blowing up my phone about this guy all week, and it's like I told them, if you're not from Earth, you don't have to worry about it, because this guy's only killing people from Earth. I'm also not sure how I can help. I already handed the security camera footage over to the ISSP. And Jet Black interrupts her and says, yeah, but I'm guessing you didn't hand over the raw footage. And she seductively says, well, don't you know me all so well? And what do I get if I give it to you? And Jet Black says, well, a giant thank you, and we'll cut you in on the bounty. But she's not interested in the bounty. She's interested in Jet Black's jet, if you know what she wants it. As she continues to hit on Jet Black, Spike is loving it, by the way. He's egging her on. Not that Woodcock needs it. Jet Black ends up reluctantly agreeing that if she gives him the raw footage, he will end up going out to dinner with her. She sends it over and disappears. They end up watching it together, and the problem is there's no audio. Luckily, turns out that Spike can read lips, which is something he never disclosed to Jet Black in the 3 years they worked together. Right before the perp kills the guy, he says, I'm going to make your little girl pay for what you rich assholes did to me and my family. At that moment, they know it's not a robbery, it's a robbery kidnapping. This also means that there's a reward on top of the bounty. They continue to watch the raw footage, and it's as if this perp doesn't even care about being caught, because he's looking right in the camera. Jet Black zooms in on the footage and notices there's a scar on his wrist, and he recognizes it. It's a scar from something called a face changer. It's a totally obsolete technology, but it's primarily used in brothels nowadays. And it turns out Jet Black actually has a scrambler, so they do encounter this guy, his face will start glitching. The two then wait for night, and they head on over to the brothel. Jet Black is planning on turning it on, and then they just wait for this guy to run back to the brothel that he bought it from. Spike heads into the brothel and waits for this guy to show up. While they're waiting for this guy to show up, Jet Black gets a hit on his phone about a guy on the black market who does in fact have a doll for Kimmy's birthday. While Jet Black's waiting for this guy to show up, he just starts ripping Chalmers to Spike. And Spike asks him, you guys are pretty close, huh? And Jet Black tells him, yeah, we fought side by side. Homicide's a brotherhood, or at least it's supposed to be. And Spike scoffs at that, saying, you call that a brotherhood? Your brother set you up. He robbed you of 5 years of your life. Years you could have spent with your wife and your kid in your house. All information that Jet Black knows. And one of the reasons why Spike is bringing it up is because that's how he feels with what happened with the syndicate and him. He asks Jet Black, you ever think about putting a bullet in a guy like that? But before he can even answer, a car horn starts honking at him, and it's the dealer. He shows Jet Black the doll, and Jet Black ends up negotiating with him. Back inside, however, as Spike is standing at the bar, he overhears a guy tell one of the bartenders that his face jammer is broken. And when Spike looks over, it's the guy they're looking for. Spike pulls a gun on him and says, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. And he decides the hard way. He ends up knocking the gun out of Spike's hands and rushing up to the roof, but there's nowhere to go. Spike ends up following him. He tells Spike, I got no issue with you, man, but Spike reminds him, well, you're worth $15 million, so I have an issue with you. Spike then hears Jet Black on the radio say, any sign of him? And Spike says, yeah, he's right in front of me. So Jet Black ends up throwing the dealer the money and grabbing the doll, telling Spike, I'll be right up. But Spike and the perp aren't just about to stand there waiting around. They start fighting, and they both are very, very proficient in martial arts. It's a really, really good fight. After a little bit, Jet Black does in fact make his way all the way up to the roof, although unfortunately, the doll is ruined. It got run over by a car, it got set on fire, and by the time he does get all the way up there, Spike is hanging on by a thread. He got kicked into a sign that is just holding him up. He's got nowhere to go, and the weight is about to fall back down on the street. It puts Jet Black in a conundrum. Grab the perp or save Spike. He ends up saving Spike, dropping the doll, by the way, in the process. It allows the perp to get away. They end up heading back to the street. No perp and no doll that you can actually bring to a child's birthday party. It's destroyed. Jet Black feels defeated because he had to beg his ex-wife to agree to him coming by the birthday party. And he hasn't really seen his daughter much in the last 7 years. But in a last-ditch effort, he ends up calling a toy store, the last toy store that he hasn't called, and it turns out they do, in fact, have a doll. Jet Black tells them, hold it for me, please. There's only one slight issue. Jet Black is about $1,000 short, and Spike doesn't have the money to lend it to him. That's the final straw for Jet Black. He wants to get the hell off of this planet, find a doll somewhere else. He is done. But Spike says, dude, we can still get this guy. There's no way he just came here for a face changer. He's definitely got a girl in there. As the two are waiting for re-entry back into the brothel, Spike asks Jet Black, you never answer my question. You ever think about putting a bullet in Chalmers? And Jet Black says, no, that'd be too quick and painless. Spike then looks across the street, and there's the sushi truck that he's been waiting for. He walks up to it, and the guy tells him, Vicious is there. Spike tells the guy he needs a package and hands him over a note of exactly what he's going to need. And the guy tells him where he's going to deliver it to. He then walks back to Jet Black, and a few minutes later, they enter the brothel. Doesn't take long for them to locate the perp's girl. Well, I should say mistress. She's a dominatrix. And she tells him that, yeah, that guy comes in here, but he's cheap, which is insane because he's loaded. But they know for a fact he's not loaded. And the reason that she thinks he's loaded is because he has these dogs. And dogs are a rich person's thing. The taxes to own a dog are massive, so only the rich really have them. They then thank the dominatrix for her time and walk out and relook at the footage. And when they scroll in, they realize this guy was just kidnapping rich people's dogs. That's what all the rich people had in common. They all have dogs. But that's a bold move because dogs make a lot of noise, especially 12 of them. So then they start thinking, where can you keep that many dogs without somebody noticing? And that's when Spike points out that the dominatrix did mention something about this guy having a job on a farm. The two head over there, and right away, they end up seeing a dog. It's the first dog they've seen in a long time. And when they walk further into the farm, there's the perp playing with all of the dogs. With guns drawn, they tell him, there's nowhere to go, man. Give it up. Spike asks him, what's with all the dogs, man? You know how hard those things are to sell, right? And the perp lets him know he's not trying to sell them. In fact, he was going to kill him, but he couldn't. They're too adorable. Spike can't believe he was going to kill the dogs. I mean, they're innocent. But the perp says, well, not to those rich assholes. To them, their dogs are like their kids. And when the Earth Gate blew, they left us behind. These rich people put their dogs in their escape pods instead of us. My parents, they didn't make it. And for years, I dreamed about paying them back. So I devised this plan, but I couldn't even go through with it. Spike and Jet Black convinced this guy to put his gun down and come in. At least they can get the bounty for him. And he's willing to do it until he's shot in the head. The ISSP comes swooping in, and they were watching the whole conversation go down. They justified it by saying, well, he had a gun at you. But in reality, Spike realizes it's because they didn't want to pay the bounty. And the cop even admits it. Spike is beside himself. He's pissed. This guy just cost him $15 million. But Jet Black actually sees this as an opportunity to salvage Kimmy's birthday party. He ends up picking one of the dogs, and he's planning on taking the dog to her tomorrow. So this day wasn't a total loss. Now, not too far away is the fish market that Vicious runs. He's walking in it, and one of his workers asks, are we really shutting this thing down? And Vicious says, it's only temporary. And what he's talking about is the red-eye distribution. And shutting down the operation is causing Vicious a lot of stress because he's got buyers waiting for delivery. He's also got a bunch of workers cooking the red-eye up. And it's kind of interesting because just like a normal drug operation, they're all stripped down naked. But unlike a normal drug operation, they have their eyes sewn shut. This keeps them from actually using the red eye. But now Vicious has no use for him. So he, along with his workers, end up murdering all of them. When he's finished this killing spree, he instructs one of his underlings to grab some chocolate that Julia likes and send it up to the penthouse. But Julia isn't in the penthouse. She went to Anna's. She hasn't been there in a long time, since her performing days, but that was a different life. She came there just to talk to Anna. So Anna takes her up to her office, and right away, Julia notices the drink that Anna had out. It's something that only one person she knows would probably be drinking, but Anna plays it off like she was feeling nostalgic. The two women sit down, and Anna says, all right, what do you want to talk about? But Julia doesn't say anything, and that's when Anna knows why she came, because Vicious got abusive once again. Julia says, we'll get through it, but Anna says, you always say this until one day you don't. Julia feels like she doesn't have a choice, but Anna reminds her, you always have a choice. You control your destiny. So now Julia has a lot to think about. And so does Jet Black. He needs to think about how he's going to explain to Kimmy that she can't keep the dog that he got. Kimmy loved the present. She was beside herself. But Jet Black's ex-wife Alyssa is not happy at all. She can't afford the dog. She can't afford the taxes. She tells Jet Black, you got to take it back. Jet Black tries to plead with her, telling her that he just wants to be a part of Kimmy's life, but Alyssa reminds him that this isn't the way to do it. So Jet Black reluctantly puts the dog back in the box and starts walking it out, but Kimmy stops him. She asks him, can I call him sometime? I mean, he's yours. And Jet Black says, of course you can. You can call him whenever you want, and gives her a giant hug. So while Jet Black was reconnecting with his daughter, Spike was reconnecting with Vicious. He went to go pick up that, quote, package that the sushi guy left him, and that package is a gun. He's up on the roof of a building that is in clear eyesight of the fish market. He calls up Vicious, and Spike tells him, I was planning on killing you, but I had a change of heart. Vicious tells him that he sent that assassin because Spike is in his business. He had to be dealt with. That's how business works. It's nothing personal. Or is it, brother? Spike tells him, I'm giving you a chance to walk away. End this now, or I end you. But Vicious tells him that he's untouchable. And that's when Spike proves that he's not. Spike knows that Vicious is sitting in a bulletproof limousine. But Spike doesn't want to kill him. He just wants to send a message. So he fires that sniper rifle. And the bullet goes right into the glass. It actually ends up chipping off a piece of the glass and cutting Vicious. And that's when Vicious knows that he's not playing around. Vicious ends up trying to send some guys to go get him, but at that point, Spike's long gone. And we'll start off episode 4 with Vicious. Maybe it was what happened with Julia. Maybe it was the fact that Fearless/Spike showed up again, but he walks into his penthouse apartment and tells Julia, I'm taking you off-world. And immediately she goes, why? And it's because Vicious is planning on starting a war with the Elders. Julia, however, thinks this is a terrible idea. Because if they end up losing this war, they have nowhere to go. So what she suggests is a coup. Banding together with the other capos and just taking out the leadership. Vicious tells her the eunuch is weak. He'd never turn on them. And that's when Julia says, but Mao, she's power hungry. And you always say the eunuch falls in line with her. Vicious says that's a tricky proposition, though. Mao is no fool. But Julia wants to see if she can set up a meeting between Mao and Vicious, so she heads to Anna's because Anna knows everybody. She tells Anna, I know you don't usually get involved in any syndicate business, but I want to know if there's any chance you can set up a meeting between Vicious and Mao. And Anna says, you're right, I don't, and there's a reason for that. Julia, what have you gotten mixed up into? And Julia just tells her, it's probably best that you don't know. Now, back to the Cowboys. Or I should say, Cowgirl. Faye Valentine is in her ship, applying makeup, looking all dolled up, and practicing an introduction, although she's giving a bunch of fake names. One of them is, hello, my name is X12345SSY. So I guess her parents were Elon Musk and Grimes. But then she ends up coming to her senses and realizes she probably should just go with the Faye Valentine moniker. She's heading to the Opera House, but it's not to see a show, it's to see a person that she's been tracking. She walks up to a guy named Mark and introduces herself, but comes clean and says, this isn't my real name, it's the name that you gave me. And Mark doesn't recognize her at all. He asks her, what exactly is this about? And she says, oh, it's about you prematurely waking up cryo-frozen amnesiacs. After that, you end up stealing their settlement money. Mark tries to play dumb, but Faye ends up slapping down a confidential case file that has her name on it. And inside, it has Mark's signature. Mark was the one who gave the go-ahead to defrost Faye, but he continues to say, I'm sorry, I think you're mistaken. She angrily says to him, you targeted me. You knew I'd wake up all scared and confused. How the hell do you sleep at night, scumbag? He then tells her you probably need to speak with one of our attorneys, but she decides to pull out her own attorney. It's a gun, and she points it at his dick. That certainly gets his attention. He nervously asks, what do you want from me? And she says, oh, you? Not much, because I know you're just the inside man. I want the bitch who took my identikit. They gave her all my belongings before they woke me up. So you're going to call Whitney Haggis Matsumoto, you know, that bitch you let con me into thinking she was my mother, and you're going to tell her that you found another amnesiac to scam. After that, you're going to set up a meeting. So Mark ends up pulling out his cell phone and calling this Whitney Matsumoto. He tells her that he's got a big fish and they want to meet. But as they're talking, a bunch of radical terrorists end up bursting into the opera house and holding everybody hostage. They're big-time environmentalists. And Faye doesn't really have time for this, but she doesn't really have a choice. She does, however, get really upset when they end up grabbing Mark and holding him as a hostage. They end up making their spiel, but they show they really aren't playing games when they release this spore grenade. And when you breathe in the spores from the grenade, it ends up turning you into a tree. One by one, people in the opera house start turning into trees. The environmentalists, realizing that this isn't really going the way they thought it was, end up heading to ships. Faye Valentine ends up heading after them because she can't let Mark and mainly his cell phone get away. But as she makes her way out of the opera house, she sees that these environmentalists are stealing her ship. And before she can do something about it, it's gone. So now she needs a ride. And she ends up tracking down Spike and Jet Black in a restaurant, telling them everything that happened to her. But the way she gets them interested in it is because she knows that these are going to be wanted criminals. It just hasn't hit the wire yet. And she has an inside drop on where they'll be because they stole her ship and she can track it. All she needs is a ship. They end up agreeing on a 60-40 split, and they head back to the Bebop and look up this wanted environmental terrorist. And she is worth a lot. $25 million to be exact. But as they're looking at the file, they look over at Faye, and her mannerisms remind them of somebody. Somebody named the Cosmonaut. Somebody from their past. They kind of just start laughing about it, remembering the night, and then they go back to work. Never filling Faye in once on who the Cosmonaut was. Faye gets back on track, figuring out where they can intercept these terrorists, but then all of a sudden she gets freaked out because Jet Black's dog walks in, and she has never seen a dog before. She doesn't really know what to do. She says to Jet Black, I hear they're like 20, 30 million a pop. But Jet Black says it's not for sale. She then says, I hear they're pretty tasty too. And Jet Black has to tell her, he's not food. It's definitely pretty weird behavior. But as her back is turned, Spike ends up grabbing her cell phone and calling Jet Black over to a private conversation in the cockpit. He asks Jet Black, you really want to partner with this nut job? And Jet Black says, yeah, man, relax. She's going to get us these terrorists and that $25 million payday. But Spike reminds him that she was the one who screwed up the Asimov deal. Spike feels like if she screwed them then, she's going to screw them now. So Spike doesn't trust her, but Jet Black is willing to give her the benefit of the doubt. But the two here are rumbling, and Spike's hunch ended up being the correct one, because when they look outside of the cockpit, they see Faye Valentine in Spike's ship with Jet Black's dog taking off. She went to go try to track down Mark herself. She doesn't really care too much about the bounty. She cares more about getting her identity kit. But what she finds is Mark had been turned into a tree. Luckily for her, his cell phone wasn't damaged, and she is able to grab it. Unfortunately for her, she didn't disarm all the tracking devices in Spike's ship. He's a pretty paranoid guy. So when she turns around, she's got Spike and Jet Black with guns pointed at her. And now Spike definitely doesn't trust her at all. They take her back to the Bebop, and the way that she's looking at him, they once again mention how she reminds them of the Cosmonaut, and they start laughing about it. But they still won't fill her in on what happened with the Cosmonaut. Faye Valentine asks, what are you guys going to do with me? And Jet Black ends up handing her food and telling her to eat. And Spike takes exception to that, saying, she lied to us, she stole my ship, she stole your dog, and now you're feeding her? And Jet Black tells him, we need her. These terrorists are a crew of 4 well-armed criminals. We have a better shot of bringing them in if we work together. After a little back and forth, Spike ends up giving up and saying, fine. But he turns to Faye and says the 60-40 split is now in our favor. Faye Valentine tries to bargain with them and say, all right, that's fine if you tell me who the Cosmonaut is. But that's when Spike says, now it's 70-30. And since Faye doesn't really have any bargaining chips here, she has to agree to it. So they start telling Faye to just remember anything that they can go on with a lead. And the only thing that she can think of is the fact that one of the terrorists mentioned to the other that he was being a real Howard. So they end up finding out that the leader of this group, her ex-husband, is named Howard. And they go to track him down, see if maybe he knows something about our whereabouts. But when they get to his location, he's dead, turned into a tree, along with just about all of his workers. They then suddenly hear some sirens going off, and when they go to see what it is, down the hill, there's missile silos. And those terrorists are arming those silos with missiles. This Howard guy was a scientist. So in order to get their message across, they're planning on chocking these missiles full of that tree spore and murdering 6,000, 6 million, 6 billion people with it. So they head down to the beach to stop these terrorists. But as Jet Black and Spike go to take them out, Faye Valentine notices that the leader of the group just took off in a ship. So Faye Valentine hops in her ship and chases after her. Spike and Jet Black watch the two ships leave orbit, and both of them know that now it's up to Faye Valentine to not only bring this perpetrator in, but also not take the bounty all for herself. However, shortly after leaving orbit, Faye gets a call on Mark's cell from Matsumoto, and she wants to meet. She gives Faye a location, and now Faye has to decide between chasing the bounty or chasing her identity, and she turns to choose her identity. But as she steers away from the bounty, she notices that a rocket was just fired, but it wasn't fired from the planet, and that's because Spike and Jet Black had stopped that. It was fired from the terrorist ship. She had seen that the rockets weren't launched, so she went to her backup plan. And when Faye sees the rocket go by, she says, "Aw, shit," but she didn't use her disguised voice, and Matsumoto ends up hearing it and saying, "Who is this?" Faye has to come clean and says, "Bitch, you know who this is. This is your worst nightmare." Matsumoto recognizes the voice and tells her, "I've missed you. Kudos for finding me, but the mama's gotta chew and screw. Bye-bye." She hangs up. Faye is frustrated, but she also has a missile to chase. And in order to keep it from crashing into the planet and killing everybody, she ends up nudging it with her ship. It ends up working. It destroys the missile, but It also ends up destroying her ship, and she ends up crashing. But Faye doesn't die. She ends up waking up in the Bebop with Jet Black's dog licking her face. Spike tells her that they followed the smoke trail, and it wasn't his idea, it was Jet Black. He told him that it was the least that they could do. He also lets her know that her ship was destroyed and says, was there anything valuable in it? And Faye says, just my entire life. Spike says, you know what's cool about losing your life? You get to build a new one. We're going for drinks when we get back. New guy's buying the first round. Spike gets up to leave, and Faye says, hey, for real, who's the cosmonaut? But Spike just says, welcome to the Bebop. Oh, and as for that bounty, well, she was killed on her ship. One of her underlings got sick of being crapped on and decided to turn the leader into a tree, so she got what she deserved. In episode 5, Spike, Jet Black, and Faye are hanging in the Bebop. They're discussing Faye's shower habits, because she does a shower, bath, shower, but it takes up all the hot water. Her methodology, though, does make sense. I will say that. They then get an alert on their cowboy station that tells them that there was a transport of prisoners that crashed, and there are prisoners running all over Europa. So it's kind of open season for cowboys to go out there and grab some bounties. And these are some heavy, heavy hitters. We're talking Tony the Chop, Fat Elvis, and Uday Taxum. And Uday Taxum is somebody very, very close to Jet Black. You see, when Jet Black used to work for the ISSP, him and his partner were headed to go arrest Uday Taxum. They were convinced that there was a dirty cop working with him. And Jet Black in particular was convinced that it was Chalmers. So when Jet Black and his partner Fad end up arriving at the location of Uday, they end up running into him, but they get into a shootout. Fad actually gets shot in the process, which leaves just Jet to go chasing after Uday. And he catches up to him. He corners him in an alley, and Uday turns around, knowing the jig is up. And Jet Black asks him, all right, who are you working for? But then all of a sudden from the corner, headlights turn on. And Jet Black goes to look, and he ends up getting shot. That was the last case that Jet ever worked. Because it was Jet Black who ended up getting fingered as that dirty cop that he was searching for. So when Jet Black sees the name Uday pop up on television, knowing that he's free, he knows that he can get the answer to who was actually the dirty cop. Maybe this could free his name. So he heads off, and he tells both Spike and Faye, you two work together. You guys go get some bounties. He then ends up calling Fat up to meet up like old times and see if they can track down Uday. And for them, it's like they never left each other. They start talking about jazz, talking about each other's wives, or I guess in this case, just Fad's wife, because Jet Black lost his to Chalmers. But then they actually get to the whole thing about Uday. Jet figures that Uday is going to need a whole new name, new identity. And he thinks he has a pretty good idea of where Uday would travel. There's a guy named Dagmar who runs an opium den, and as a side hustle, he also makes counterfeit papers. So they decide to go pay him a visit. As they're heading over there, Jet Black tells Fad that he is positive at this point that Chalmers pulled the trigger that night, and he was set up by Chalmers. Because Chalmers was the first one to arrive on the scene, and then Chalmers ended up stealing his wife. So they run on over to the opium den that Dagmar runs, and they convince the girl in the front to let them back to actually talk to him. And by convince, I mean flash their badge. And Dagmar's a little surprised to see him because he knows that Jet Black was in prison, but Jet Black just says, I was rehabilitated. They then ask him if he's seen Uday Taxum, but he says, no, I haven't seen him, and I don't do that anymore. But it doesn't take long for them to find Uday Taxum's new papers. They end up taking the guy's teeth. Yeah. They ended up taking Dagmar's damn teeth out. I should say like his fake teeth. They didn't just like rip them out, Saw style, but still, it's a cold gesture. They asked Dagmar, when's he picking up these papers? And he, after a while, admits an hour, maybe 2. So they tell him they're going across the street and a call when he shows up. As they're leaving the opium den, they see Chalmers and his new partner, and they figure this is a dead giveaway that Chalmers is a dirty cop. Chalmers is trying to get to Uday to kill him before they do. Problem is, Chalmers is also at the only exit, so they need to cause a distraction. And Fad does that by shooting what looks like one of the opium pods. As they're leaving, they both realize that Uday's not coming back. They just burned the paper guy. Cops are going to be swarming all over this place. What they're going to have to do is just figure out where Uday is going. After thinking about it, Jet Black realizes the only way Uday gets off Europa without papers is if he stows away in an interplanetary container freighter. That means they have to head to a sorting station because they figure that's where Uday has to be. So they end up heading to that sorting station, and there are a ton of shipping containers. They slowly make their way around, looking in each one, trying to find Uday, until all of a sudden they open up the right one, and Uday bursts on out, and they're in a chase. And just like last time, Jet Black ends up cornering Uday, and when Uday turns around, he says, Hugh? Ah, jeez. All right, don't shoot. I was just doing what he told me. Jet Black tells him, I'm not going to kill you. I just need to know who was the dirty cop. It was Chalmers, wasn't it? But before Uday can even answer, he gets a bullet in the head. And when Jet Black turns around, it's not Chalmers, It's Fad. Jet Black cannot believe that it was his own partner this entire time. He feels completely betrayed. And Fad tells him that he was working for the syndicate. They needed an inside man. He needed a lot of money, so it ended up working out. But Fad can't let Jet Black get away, so he ends up apologizing, but then shooting him. Although he's unaware that Jet Black now has a bionic arm, so the bullet just ricochets off of it, and Jet Black ends up shooting his partner. A few seconds later, Chalmers and his new partner end up arriving, and right off the bat, they figure it out, that Fad killed Uday and Jet Black killed Fad. Jet Black asks Chalmers, "You knew he was dirty this entire time?" And Chalmers says, "Yeah, I was trying to build a case." It's amazing, man, the luck you have. You just killed the only man that could have cleared your name. Jet Black just asks, "All right, what do we do now?" Thinking that Chalmers is probably going to bring him in, but Chalmers says, "Nah, should probably get out of here before these cops show up." As far as I'm concerned, these two scumbags just shot themselves. Jet Black's pretty surprised by this, but he doesn't ask twice and heads off back to the Bebop. And the whole time, while Jet Black was trying to clear his name, figure out who the dirty cop was, you had Spike and Faye not being able to agree on a bounty that they were going to pursue. I mean, every name that was brought up, one of them was coming up with an excuse on not to go after it. But this time together was a nice bonding experience for them. They bonded over Faye's shower tactics, although not in that way. Get your mind out of the gutter. Spike ended up becoming a big fan of the shower bath shower. They also bonded over the fact that Faye is a legitimate bounty hunter. She ended up getting a bounty that Spike couldn't believe. So even though they didn't really want to work together, they ended up forming a little bit of a friendship. And then finally there's Vicious. He's going to meet with Mao, and he's bringing Julia with him. And this is a huge meeting. They know they only have one shot at this. And Mao works at a refinery. Looks like she runs the place. And she is not happy with Vicious because she's the one who gave Vicious that assassin to go after Fearless. The same assassin who ended up dead. Apparently this guy was super legit. She asked Vicious who was this extraordinary Mark who had the skills to kill my hitman, but Vicious doesn't tell her, simply saying that reparations will be made. He then gives Mao his big master plan, that they take down the Elders, band together. And since the Elders have 3 people at the top, which is Syndicate tradition, they're going to do the same. Their 3 people, however, will be Vicious, Mao, and a guy named Santiago, a.k.a. the Eunuch. Mao doesn't believe that Santiago will go along with it, but Vicious says he will if you ask him. And she tells him, "Don't underestimate the Eunuch. You think he's called that because he has no balls, right?" Wrong. He's called that because he would snip the balls off of his enemy and eat them. Vicious says, "Well, tell them that I have 2 to give him. 2%, that is, of my net. Plus the Ganymede territories. Same for you, by the way." Mao tells him it's a good deal, but then says no. Unless Julia sings for me. That is a no-go for Vicious. And Mao starts antagonizing him, saying, "This is why I missed your partner. Fearless, he had it all." And the more that she brings up Fearless and how Fearless was better than Vicious, Vicious's anger is rising and rising until finally he just snaps, yelling at her, "Fuck Fearless. You know what? I don't need you." But Julia realizes that they do need Mao, so she ends up singing for Mao. Because of this, Mao ends up agreeing, but when they get back to the penthouse, Vicious is pissed off at Julia. He feels like Julia just embarrassed him. And she tells him, "As soon as you told Mao the plan, you needed her to agree, so I did it, and you ended up getting what you wanted." She then asks Vicious what was the whole thing about that hitman, but Vicious doesn't answer, just walking off. Julia pours herself a drink and thinks about it, and that's when it finally connects with her. The only person who could have killed the best hitman in the area. The only person that would have been drinking that drink in Anna's place. It's got to mean one thing. Fearless is alive. In episode 6, the Bebop is down. Jet Black has to hire a mechanic, and he's pretty pissed off because when she tells him what's wrong with it, he knows it's going to cost a fortune. So he tells her to fix it, kind of. He doesn't want a new flux capacitor. He wants to go find a refurbished one because it'll be cheaper. He ends up going to Spike's room and saying, "We're going to be grounded for a few hours, and this repair is going to cost us a lot of money, so why don't you go get a bounty?" Jet Black ended up getting a lead from a hacker named Radical Ed, but this lead is new info on an old bounty. It's a guru/cult leader named Sai Baba, and he must have been the biggest In Vogue fan in the world because the motto that he went with was, "Free your mind, the rest will follow." The guy's going by a new cover name, Dr. Alondis. But Spike thinks it's a rabbit hole to nowhere, a complete pipe dream. And Jet Black reminds him that what it is a lead with a $90 million price tag. So Jet Black sends him the info and tells him to go check it out. As he's heading through the cabin to make his way out to go find that part, he sees Faye Valentine opening up this new fancy gun. and it's called a railgun, but a lot of people think it's a total scam, which is really a buzzkill to Faye, who's pretty excited about it. He tells Faye, I'm heading out to grab a part, but while I'm gone, make sure the mechanic isn't, screwing around all my time. He then heads out, and Spike follows suit later, and when he sees the railgun, he says the same thing Jet Black did. Those things are a total scam. So a little while after the two guys leave, Faye heads down and check on the mechanic, but the mechanic is smoking hot. She's like a hot mechanic. Totally dispels the myth that mechanics can't be hot, which is a real myth. Unfortunately, though, she also thinks the railgun is a total scam, but she does find Faye Valentine to be quite the catch. And after she's done fixing the Bebop, they get it on. She even gives Faye her first orgasm. At least she thinks. She tells the mechanic that she woke up from a pretty rough cryo nap, and she's gone 2 years without knowing who she is, what she did in previous life. It's been rough, but the mechanic tells her that probably the roughest part is the fact that she still went 2 years without having an orgasm. So while those two were getting to know each other, Spike went and tracked down that lead. He walks into the storefront where Dr. Landis is posted up, and he's got a bunch of old TVs hooked up to the walls. When you walk in, one of the TVs pops on and a woman greets you, but it's as if she can see you, and she's talking to you face to face. She tells Spike that Dr. Landis wants to see her, but that TV turns off, and another one turns on with her face again, and it kind of lures you in. All the while, she's giving you a lot of cult speak. Eventually, it leads to a separate room. When the woman on the TV tells him to have a seat and put goggles over his eyes, he tells the woman, I'm just here to see Dr. Landis. And she tells him that Dr. Landis wants to meet him too, but first, a brief orientation is necessary. So Spike puts the goggles on and finds out that this is going to be a 90-minute orientation. So he says, screw that, and takes them off. And Spike takes a more direct approach. He sees another door and decides to kick it in, but that door goes to the alley. And when he heads back to the front of the store, right before he goes in, he hears a voice say, fearless. And when he turns around, there's Julia. She tells him that she tracked him down with Anna's help. And she came there to warn him that Vicious and an entire army is coming there today to get him. He says to her, then come with me. But she says, I didn't come here to be with you. I came to save you. He says, I've already lost you once. I'm not losing you again. But she says, they'll be here any minute. You gotta run. He looks at her and says, I tried for 3 years to let you go, and I can't. But then they hear a gunshot, and Julia drops, because she was just shot in the head by Vicious and his goons. But then you find out the whole thing was a dream. Spike ends up taking off the goggles, seeing the same side door, kicking the same side door in, and that's when you realize all of this is a dream. He's just in a continuous time loop. Every time he goes to the front, there's Julia waiting for him. Now, in the real world, the chair that he's in has literally trapped him to the chair. It injects him with something that looks like a worm, travels to his brain, and it starts going to work. In the time loop, though, he's still talking to Julia. The second time, though, he knows they're coming, so he tries to grab Julia, have her get on a motorcycle, head out of there. And she reiterates, you need to let me go. She reluctantly ends up getting on the bike. They head to a hotel room, and he tells Julia what he's currently up to. And she asks the same question Anna asked. Does your partner know what you used to be? He tells Julia, I waited for you that night, but you never came. I was told you chose somebody else. She tells him that she was scared, and he says, I could have kept us safe. But she says, you couldn't. Not then and not now. She once again says, you have to let me go. You have to leave me. It's the only way that you'll be safe. But he once again tells her that he's not losing her again. No one's ever made him feel the way that she does. Vicious and his goons then burst through the hotel door, kill Julia, and before they can kill Spike, he wakes up again. But that's what's going on in Spike's mind. Back in the real world, Jet Black was trying to get a hold of Spike, and Spike wasn't picking up because he was busy in this time loop. So when Jet Black headed over to Dr. Landis' place, what he found was all the TVs smashed. When he went to the back room where Spike was located, he sees Spike. He tries to unhook him, but then all of a sudden a voice from the side says, don't do that. If you take off the goggles, you're going to fry his brain. Jet Black asks, what are you doing to him? And the guy says, I'm attempting to save him. Jet Black says, are you Landis or Sai-Ba? And the guy says, no. Radical Ed sent me an alert. And Sai-Ba, there's a check you're never going to cash. There is no Sai-Ba. There never was. That was a cover story that we cooked up for this AI that went psychotic. I shut it down immediately, but not before thousands of test subjects were killed. Jet Black asks what's going on with Spike, and he lets him know that Spike is in a VR time loop, and the AI is trying to capture his subconsciousness. And when Jet Black burst in, he was trying to rewire the system. So this guy continues to go to work, but as he's trying to rewire the system, on the goggles, there's a percentage that keeps going up. and he lets Jet Black know that that's the AI trying to get Spike to give up his emotional tether. Once he does, he's cooked. And that is the reason why Julia keeps saying, you have to let me go, but Spike is fighting back. This guy works and works, but then all of a sudden, the wires just kind of blow up. He tells Jet Black, we can't shut it down from here. You're going to have to cut the power from the mainframe. And the mainframe is in Earth. It's not exactly a quick journey, so Jet Black flies out of that place and heads back to the Bebop. And that's where he sees both Faye Valentine and the mechanic having pillow talk, and he doesn't even have time to process it because he says, Spike's in trouble, we gotta go. He throws the mechanic the part they need and tells them wheels are up in 2 minutes. And that's not nearly enough time for the mechanic to properly put this thing in. But Jet Black tells her, you gotta make it work. So as they head off to Earth, Julia in the time loop is getting meaner and meaner. As Vicious and his goons are trying to kill them both, she tells Spike, when I said I didn't feel safe, I wasn't talking about Vicious, I was talking about you. You just love taking your best friend's girl, and now you're going to get me killed. I could never love a monster like you. So the AI is going for a different kind of approach. The Bebop, however, arrives on Earth, and Earth has clearly seen better days, but so has the Bebop. It's a crash landing. Jet Black, Spike, the mechanic, rush into the mainframe room, and Jet Black is trying to get in, but it's bulletproof glass. It's tough. And that's when the mechanic gives Faye Valentine a bobby pin. And that's a bobby pin that she can use with the railgun. And it works. She fires it, and it destroys the mainframe, saving Spike in the process with 1% to go before the AI took over. On Earth, Jet Black, Faye, and the mechanic celebrate, but they have to get back because they have to pick Spike up. And he is pretty hungover from this AI experience. He asks Jet Black, did we find Landis? And Jet Black says, oh, we found him, but not in a way that gets us paid. Jet Black throws down a plaque from the mainframe, and it says, Life Observing Neural Developmental Emotional System. You take the first letter from each of those words, you get Landis. The AI must have restarted itself and created the Dr. Landis identity to lure people in. Jet Black tells Spike, I'm glad you're okay, and Spike gets up, but he asks him, hey, when you were wearing those goggle things, what did you see in there anyway? And Spike just says, I don't remember, which is total horse hockey. Back downstairs, the mechanic gets dressed and is saying goodbye to Faye. Faye asks her, can I call you sometime? And she says, yeah, but first you have to figure out who the real you is. Right before the mechanic leaves, Faye gives her the railgun, saying, it's a terrible gun for a bounty hunter anyway. Just take it as something to remember me by. And the mechanic takes it, but tells her she's yours whenever you want it back. We'll start off episode 7 with the meeting between Vicious, Mao, and the eunuch. Vicious goes over his entire plan. Mao is going to go to the elders and tell them about Vicious turning on them. The eunuch is going to bring him in cuffed. As is customary, the elders are going to demand that Vicious be killed with his own blade, which Mao will have. The cuffs won't really be cuffed, though. Vicious will end up breaking free, grabbing the katana, and killing all of them. The eunuch ends up bumping the price up from 2% to 3%, and it looks like the group has a deal. Now, one person who wasn't at this meeting, though, was Julia, who actually came up with this entire plan. While Vicious was talking to Mao and the eunuch, Julia headed to Anna's because she's pretty pissed off. She can't believe Anna did not tell her that Fearless was alive. Anna tells her that he's going by the name Spike Spiegel at the moment, and when he came, he did ask about her. Julia screams at her, you should have told me. I could have gone to him. And that's when Anna lets her know that Vicious knows that Spike is alive, and if she were to go with Spike, Vicious would hunt them down. He wouldn't stop until the two are dead. So Julia knows she needs another plan, so she heads to Mao. And she tells Mao, I want you to take Vicious's head. Vicious offered you 2%. I'm offering you the whole thing. Mao's a little confused and asks, what's in it for you? And Julia tells her a ticket out of the syndicate. And that is way too good of an offer, so Mao is fully on Team Julia, and she will be turning on Vicious. Now, over with the Bebop, they're just enjoying some R&R, chilling. But as Faye is outside reading a magazine, Matsumoto shows up, a.k.a. her, quote, mother. And she's shown up because she needs a ride. Faye is dumbfounded, not just because she showed up and had the audacity to do that, but the fact that she showed up asking for something after everything that she's put Faye through. But she's willing to give her her identikit if she's willing to give her a ride. Faye tells her the only issue is that she's riding with some cowboys, and Matsumoto is pretty wanted. And Matsumoto says, well, why would your cowboy friends even think to look up your dear mother? Faye doesn't like the idea of lying to her friends, but Matsumoto says, don't lie, just tell stories. So Faye brings her mom aboard, and both Jet Black and Spike are shocked to even learn that Faye has a mother. And because Faye's mother is a con artist, she's really good at being likable. And that's exactly what happens. Just Spike and Jet Black end up really, really liking her company. But when Faye mentions how her mother dropped by looking for a ride, Jet Black says, no can do. Kimmy has a recital at 2. I can't miss it. And Matsumoto starts putting on the charm, asking about Kimmy, how old she is, what she's into. Faye mentions how if they leave right now, they can be back by the recital. And her mom goes one step further by saying, well, I can't ask a father to miss his recital just for my personal problems. She's looking for them to pry, and they do. She tells them that she's on the run from her husband. It's not Faye's father, that was a while ago, but her latest one. This sob story ends up convincing Jet to give her a lift. So on the journey, Matsumoto starts cooking up some roast pepper dumpling soup, and the boys are loving it, but they are a little curious because Faye isn't exactly being receptive to Matsumoto. It's piqued the interest of Jet Black. He starts looking at the facial recognition scans from them walking in and finds out that Faye's mom is wanted for a lot. They realize that Matsumoto is a con artist and Faye's either getting taken or she's in on it. And when they question Faye about it, she comes clean that while she thought this woman was her mother, she found out that she's not. She explains the whole ordeal, how Matsumoto got her out of cryo sleep pretending to be her mother, and because of her amnesia, she had no idea that she was being scammed. Now, Matsumoto is holding her identikit hostage in order to get this ride. Jet Black, though, is pissed. He feels like he trusted Faye, and she abused that trust. As Faye's apologizing for this, they end up getting a message over their intercom, and they think it's pirates, but it's not. It's way worse than that. It's Matsumoto's husband, the biggest arms dealer in the galaxy, a guy named the Mink. The Mink tells them they have 1 hour to hand Matsumoto over, or he's going to kill them all. And that's when Matsumoto comes out, because she knows that the Mink that is talking to them is a hologram. They start throwing insults back and forth. Matsumoto tells them, if you want me, you have to go through my friends first. Faye, Spike, and Jet Black vehemently deny that. And that's when Jet Black pulls the plug. He realizes that if the Mink can get to him like this, he probably knows where they currently are, and they need to get going immediately. So Jet Black ends up flying Matsumoto to the city that she wanted to go to. But he ends up handcuffing her, telling Faye, I'm taking your mom in, and it's because you lied. You brought your mom to my ship, and now I've got the Mink all over me. So, not really taking advice from you right now. Jet Black then looks down at Matsumoto's hand and sees a giant ring. But he doesn't believe it's actually a ring, and that's because it's not. It's a tracking device. Jet Black then looks at her and says, where is Faye's identikit? And Matsumoto says the only way she's getting it is if you take these handcuffs off. You take them off, I take her there. So Jet Black ends up reluctantly taking the cuffs off. Jet Black and Spike are going to take the tracking device and try to get the Mink off their tail, while Matsumoto and Faye go and get her identity. As Jet Black and Spike are kind of just walking through the city, Jet Black gets the reminder on his phone that he's got Kimmy's recital, so he has to go and be a doting father. Spike tries to stop him, though, and say, whoa, what do you want me to do about this tracking device? And Jet Black says, figure it out, Spike. And Spike says, you expect me to deal with the most notorious arms dealer in the galaxy and all of his goons while you go watch a recital? But Jet Black tells him she's got the lead, and that changes things. Jet Black ends up popping into a shop, setting up his hologram, and he's transported right into Kimmy's recital. He's sitting there with both Chalmers and Alyssa. And Jet's relationship with Chalmers has gotten way better since the whole snafu with his ex-partner. He sent Chalmers money to buy Kimmy flowers, and he did it. It impresses Alyssa because Jet is clearly trying to be involved. At one point during the recital, Chalmers ends up getting up closer to get some pictures, and Jet asks Alyssa, can you send me some of those? And she says, of course. Jet is loving it. He loves watching Kimmy shine as the sun. But outside, Spike is having to fight off an entire army by himself. Luckily, though, he's able to do it. And when Jet ends the call, the first thing Spike asks is, how was she? And Jet says, she was really good. He then looks at all the bodies and says, did you get them all? And Spike says, yeah. And they think that they got the Mink, but when Jet turns the body over, they realize they didn't get the Mink. And that's because the Mink put 2 tracking devices on his ex-wife. And he ended up tracking his ex-wife to the storage unit where she had a lot of his stuff. Those things do include, by the way, all the identikits. And before Matsumoto hands it over to Faye, she says, are you sure you really want to know who you are? You could come team up with me. We do make a good pair. But Faye's gotta know. So she gives her a key to the lockbox, and when Faye opens it, it's a VHS tape. Faye doesn't even know what a VHS tape is. Even Matsumoto's pretty surprised that that was all that was in there. But the two are interrupted when the Mink shows up. At first, you think the Mink is going to end up killing Matsumoto and Faye. But when the Mink pulls out the gun, Faye says, please don't kill her, or me. And when the Mink says, who are you? Faye looks at Matsumoto and says, I'm her daughter. She explains to the mink that Matsumoto is a lying, cheating, conniving person, but that's how she survives, and she probably didn't mean to hurt him like Matsumoto didn't mean to hurt her. The mink, though, isn't really convinced not to kill them, actually telling his henchmen, kill them both. But then Matsumoto says saddle stitch. And instead of killing them, the mink ends up killing his henchman because saddle stitch is the safe word. This whole thing was a ruse. It was like a kinky role-playing thing. And he killed his henchman because, well, his henchman just heard the safe word. It's not like you can ever change that. They get over the death pretty quickly, and both Matsumoto and the mink start going at it. It's pretty uncomfortable for Faye. After a quick makeout sesh, the mink starts taking Matsumoto back to his ship, and Faye ends up taking the ship that Matsumoto had and flying off. When she gets back to the Bebop, she apologizes once again to both Jet Black and Spike, but then she shows them what was in her Identibox, and luckily for her, Jet Black actually has a VCR. So he hooks it up, they pop in the videotape, and there you see Faye Valentine as a little girl from 50 years ago. It's weird though, she never once introduced herself at all. But it's cute, she's playing the piano, she's saying how she hopes the future her is happy, and for a split second you do hear Faye's real mother in the background. In episode 8, Vicious knows that he still has a Fearless problem, and he needs to take care of it. Since Fearless already took out one of his hitmen, he needs to up it a little bit. He's gotten a tip about a crazy, crazy guy who might be able to get the job done, but he's locked away in a dog lab. He, along with his 2 employees, end up breaking in, and the whole time, the veterinarian/scientist, whatever you want to call her, is begging him not to do this, saying that the person he's trying to let out is a crazed psychopath. He was an experiment gone wrong. They hooked him on Red Eye to control him. They end up demanding, though, that she open the door, and at gunpoint, she does so. This guy ends up coming out in a straitjacket, but he's clearly as advertised. His name is Pierre Lafou, and he doesn't like 2 things: the scientist and dogs. As soon as he walks out, dogs start barking at him, and it completely throws him off his game. He starts having flashbacks of these experiments. So Vicious ends up taking care of one of his issues and shooting the scientist. Pierre thanks him, and Vicious says, "You can pay me back by finding somebody and killing them. If you do that, you'll have all the red eye you want." So Piero ends up heading out to try to find Spike Spiegel. Vicious, however, has his planned coup of the Elders. Vicious ends up meeting up with the eunuch to do his part, but the eunuch brought gunmen. All that Vicious brought was Julia. He tells the eunuch, "Well, then we'll take my ship, because with my ship, at least my men can track me if you decide you want to eat my balls." The eunuch ends up agreeing to it. They, quote, shackle Vicious, and right before he leaves, Vicious says goodbye to Julia, and they head off to go overthrow the Elders. But the plan doesn't go according to the way that Vicious had it written out, because Mal tries to turn on him. She ends up cutting off his head, or so she thinks. It wasn't actually Vicious. Vicious ended up switching spots with the eunuch in his ship, putting that masking device on him. So while it looked like Vicious the entire time, it wasn't. She accidentally killed the eunuch. Vicious then ends up going to work, stabbing Mal, taking out the Elder's guards, and leaving the head Elder. And that's when you find out that the head Elder is actually Vicious's father. Right before Vicious kills his dad, he says, it's a crime that my mother isn't alive to witness this. He stabs his father, but right before his father dies, he tells Vicious, "You are nothing but a scared little boy. You will never be anything else." He then finishes the job and goes to take care of the last remaining person alive, which is Mao. Mao is badly injured, but she's not dead. But right before Vicious ends up killing her, Mal says to him, "Tell Julia I'm sorry." And Vicious thinks it's because she made Julia sing. But Mal says, "No, because I failed her. She wanted me to bring your head to her." And that's when Vicious realized that he had been double-crossed. When he returns to the penthouse apartment, Julia is pretty surprised to see him, and he's carrying Mal's head. And Julia is terrified. Now, while all of that madness was going on, the Bebop crew went bowling. They did so because after everything that happened with Faye, they feel like they need to brighten her spirits a bit. So they ended up throwing her a mini birthday party. They know that she doesn't know when her birthday actually is, so they decided that it would be that day. But as they're leaving the bowling alley, that's when they run into Piero for the first time. And they're a little thrown off that this random guy decided to kind of float in with a bunch of knives and guns. But when he shows them their weapons, they end up shooting at him. Doesn't work, though. He's got some kind of force field around him. It doesn't take long for Piero to end up separating Spike from Faye and Jet Black. And Piero ends up working Spike over pretty good, burning Spike in the process. The group is only saved when Jet Black's dog ends up barking at Piero and throwing him off. It's got Piero in a complete trance to the point where it allows Jet Black, Spike, and Faye to get away. They end up rushing back to the Bebop and they throw Spike in a tub to rehabilitate him. But the process is extremely painful to the point where it ends up knocking Spike out. Jet Black ends up leaving. He needs to figure out who exactly was just after them. He tells Faye to take care of Spike in the meantime. And Jet Black goes and has a conversation with Woodcock. And Woodcock did dig around. She did her best. But it turns out that the guy that they're looking for is a complete phantom. There's no information on him at all. Jet Black realized the only kind of people that have the ability to wipe someone's entire slate clean are special forces, black bag outfits, and the Syndicate. And those kind of people don't really seem the type that would go after Jet Black. So Woodcock asks, what about your partner? I mean, have you ever looked into him? And Jet Black hasn't. He tells her saving his life was the only job interview he ever needed. After he did that, Jet Black didn't question Spike's integrity. Woodcock kind of figured this would be the answer, so she took the liberty of looking up Spike. And Spike is even more of a phantom than the guy that they're looking for. This raises a few questions. Jet Black then heads back to the Bebop, and at this point, Spike is up and alert, although he's in extreme pain. Jet Black asks Spike, hey, what did that guy say to you? I heard you two talking. What was it? Now, what the guy actually said was, Vicious sends his regards. What Spike tells Jet Black is that this maniac yelled, die, die, die. Spike then goes in the common area to start looking up if he can find any information about this guy that attacked him. And that's when they notice that Jet Black's dog, Ian, is staring at them with glowing eyes. And then all of a sudden, Piero's face ends up broadcasting out of the dog's eyes and right there in front of him, kind of like a hologram. He's able to do this because all those experiments ended up linking the dogs to Piero. He makes it very clear that he's after Spike, but he is willing to kill everybody on board if Spike doesn't meet him at this one location. The location is an old amusement park that Piero used to go to as a kid, but it's completely run down, dilapidated. And then as quickly as he showed up, he disappears out of the dog's eyes. And the dog ends up going back to being a dog. Spike ends up arming himself to go and meet with this guy, but Jet Black wants to go with him, and Spike doesn't want that at all. Jet Black says to him, you're going up against a military-grade killer. You can't go up against him alone. The guy is a force field. But Spike corrects him, saying that what he has is something that diffuses kinetic energy from explosives or fast-moving bursts like bullets, but it won't protect him against knives. If he gets close enough, he can stab this guy. And Jet Black says, I get how you think that with your past and all. Yeah, I know who you used to be. A man with your skills only comes from one place. You must have been on some kind of special ops team. There's no shame in that. Spike just says, I don't want to talk about it. And Jet Black says, well, you're on my ship. So if you want to go on a suicide run, you have to go through me first. And Faye comes over and says, me too. The group does realize that before they even do anything, though, they do have a dog problem. They end up dropping the dog off and flying away. I don't condone that. They should have found a good home for it, but it's a different time. They end up devising a plan where Spike ends up flying in. He ends up getting back up. They end up taking out the bad guy. Spike ends up getting in his ship and heading off for Phase 1, telling them, I'll buzz you when I need you. But then the Bebop ends up getting hit with a virus. It shuts down everything. They can't hear Spike at all. And when Jet Black goes to investigate what's causing it, he realizes that Spike ended up putting the virus there. He didn't want them coming. He didn't want them following him at all. So it's just Spike and this madman who looks like he's a reject from that one season of American Horror Story. Spike ended up bringing a knife to a gunfight. It gets to the point where Spike only has one knife left. But the good news is he finds a robotic dog. And when he throws that at Piero, it ends up distracting him in enough time for Spike to go up and stab him in the leg. But Piero ends up reacting really bizarrely. He ends up crying and yelling for his mommy. Spike ends up initiating Piero's jetpack, and Piero ends up just flying off. But as Piero is flying off, a bunch of grenades fall from the sky. They explode, and it throws Spike, knocking him out. In Episode 9, you get backstory on the relationship between Vicious and Fearless. Both of them are working their way up in the Syndicate. They're working for a guy named Stax who runs the fish market. He lets them know that there's an important meeting going on with the Neptune cartel, and they want to send Vicious and Fearless to go take care of it. It rains diamonds on Neptune, and the Syndicate wants a piece of it. Although Vicious doesn't want to deal with those, quote, scumbags. Doesn't matter, though. Vicious isn't a capo, so he's going to have to go and broker the deal with a guy named Kaching. Stax ends up sending Vicious away and keeping Fearless, and Stax hates the fact that he has to bring up an elder's kid. He just feels like there's something rotten going on with Vicious. So he tells Fearless, we're sending you really to just keep him in check. Make sure things go smoothly. The whole time, though, Fearless is defending Vicious at every turn, saying he's not that bad. When Fearless ends up meeting back up with Vicious, Vicious is pumped because he feels like he's finally getting the respect that he deserves. He tells Fearless the syndicate will be mine one day. You know that, right? And Fearless says, I do, and I'm happy for you. But Vicious corrects him and says, happy for us, because where I go, you go, brother. They then get interrupted when a new girl comes up on stage at Anna's, and her name's Julia. She wasn't even supposed to sing that night, but the singer got cold feet, got sick, so they threw Julia up on stage, and she shines. And Vicious is definitely smitten. When she gets to the back after her performance, Anna congratulates her, but she's got a bottle of champagne. And Julia says, you didn't have to, and Anna says, I didn't, and admirer did. I brought it despite my better judgment, because he's syndicate. And of course, that admirer is Vicious. The two start dating, and Fearless is happy for his friend that he found somebody. But of course, on dates, Vicious is telling her about Fearless, and she likes the guy. He's way funnier than Vicious. They end up getting called to a meeting at the fish market, where Stax tells them that it's time for the Neptune Cartel meeting. The cartel, though, does have some rules for the meeting, and that's no weapons. So that's going to force these two to go in unarmed. And Fearless is fine with it, but Vicious is not. They go to meet with the Neptune Cartel, but Vicious doesn't follow Stax's orders. He brings a gun, and Fearless knows it, so he grabs it beforehand. After all, he's there to keep things in check. And the meeting with Kaching does not go well. Vicious feels like he got insulted by Kaching, and he tries to cut off his hand. He tells Stax, he insulted me, and more importantly, he insulted the syndicate, but Stax says, you idiot. Did you think this was just about diamonds? Oh, geez, you did, didn't you? This was about the syndicate getting a foothold in the outer planets. Fearless tries to say, we can fix this, but Stax yells at them, you guys are idiots. The fix will come down from the elders, and you guys will do nothing. But Vicious is getting a little sick of the way that Stax talks to him. He still feels like he was in the right. He's venting about the fact that the elders will see his way as they're waiting for Julia to show up. And she does, and she's on cloud 9 because she was told by Anna that she's going to be the premier talent at Anna's. But when she tells them both about her new promotion, the only one who gets really excited for her is Fearless. She asks Vicious to dance with her, and he says, no, I'm okay. And Fearless even tries to encourage him to do it, but he says, no, if you like this place so much, you do it. As they're on the dance floor, Julia says, how did you two end up partners? And Fearless says, he saved me. He convinced his father to take me in and build a life for me. We became brothers that day. They then start dancing it up, but they definitely share a moment that's caught on camera. After a few hours in the bar, everybody seems to be having a better time, including Vicious. But as they're driving around, Vicious ends up noticing Kaching on the street and tracks him down into an alley at the behest of Fearless. He ends up running him over. He starts attacking Kaching to the point where Fearless has to get out of the car and try to stop him, but he can't. He ends up telling Fearless, take her home and I'll deal with him. And by dealing with him, he means ripping all of his teeth out and then burning the body. When Fearless takes Julia home, he tells a pretty upset Julia, you're safe with me. And that's when the two hook up for the first time. During pillow talk, he tells Julia, all my life, I tried to feel nothing, because that means that I don't have anything to lose. But right now, all I'm afraid of is losing you. He ends up having to leave Julia because he gets a phone call from Stax, and Stax has found out about what happened to Kaching. He asks Fearless, were you with him when he killed Kaching? And at first, Fearless tries to play dumb, but then he says, it wasn't him, it was me. And Stax yells at him, dude, it was in the street. People saw it. I know you think you owe him, but a sane person will wonder how long you think you have to pay that debt. He tells Stax, sir, I can fix this, but Stax says, no, it's over, man. Vicious crossed the line. The Neptune Cartel wants him dead, and Fearless knows that if they don't comply, there's going to be a war. And we're talking like a last man standing type of war. Fearless says there's no way that his father will allow him to be killed. But Stax tells him, actually, his father's the one who sanctioned it, and they want you to do it. Fearless, though, can't bring himself to do it. He does go visit Vicious before he goes off to fix this thing, and Vicious is drinking, cursing about the fact that his dad is so cold-hearted that he made him watch, when he was 9 years old, his mother jump off a building. Fearless then heads off and lives up to his name. He knows that if a war is going to happen with the last man standing, well, then he better be the last man standing. He goes and visits the Neptune Cartel and kills all of them. When he's about to leave, he gets caught by a little girl, and he tells the girl, run, now. He's got a stern rule not to kill women or children. It's a rule that Vicious always gave him crap for because these people could eventually identify him. So at the last minute, he hears Vicious's voice tell him that, and he ends up shooting the gun and killing her. It's at that moment that he knows he's got to get out of the syndicate. He can't keep doing this. He goes and visits Julia, and he tells her that he's leaving that night, but he wants her to run away with him. At first, she says that she can't because Vicious will continue to track them down. Fearless the whole time saying that he'll keep him safe. Eventually, though, she gives in and they agree to meet at a bridge. Fearless then goes and visits Anna. He's got a good relationship with Anna, so this might be a little bit easier for him than other syndicate members. But he tells Anna, I need new papers, I need a new name, I need a new identity, and I also need one for Julia. She gives him the same warning that Julia gave him. You cannot run the syndicate. But eventually she gives in to the request because she knows that Julia will be safer with Fearless than she will be with Vicious. And Vicious is back in his penthouse apartment, passed out. He gets woken up by his father, who is disappointed in him, which isn't a real surprise. Seems like it's kind of a trend with him in his life. At first, though, his dad says, I've come to congratulate you. What you and Fearless did to the Neptune cartel, that's not even possible. I'm proud of you. And because of the fact that he's finally getting the acceptance that he seeks from his dad, he lies and says, yeah, I mean, they disrespected the syndicate. But the whole time, his dad knows that he's lying about it. That's when his dad starts going in on how he's not man enough and how he's a disappointment. His dad then tells him that Fearless is actually a wild card in this whole situation. His dad believed that he was loyal to the syndicate. Vicious believed that he was loyal to him. In reality, he says he was just loyal to himself. He tells Vicious, while you were drinking, your brother was busy with your girlfriend. Vicious says he wouldn't, but his dad says, oh, he did. Papers were processed. They're not just running around on you, they're running away from you. Vicious asks his dad, where are they? And his dad tells him, if you want to be a capo, capos don't ask questions. They find answers. So Vicious goes to find some answers, storming into Anna's with a katana and demanding to know where Fearless is taking Julia. Vicious ends up plunging that katana through Anna's leg, and the pain's too much. She ends up giving up the location. Before Julia can even leave to go meet Fearless, Vicious sends one of the syndicate members to go pick her up, claiming that it's not safe for her out there. Vicious then goes to meet Fearless, where Fearless and Julia were supposed to meet. And he tells Fearless, she chose me. They then light Fearless's body up with bullets, and his body falls into the river and floats away. And they assume he's dead, but of course, he's not. And then finally, in episode 10, Faye and Jet Black eventually arrive at the theme park. They're looking all over for Spike, but they can't find him. While she's looking for Spike, Faye ends up seeing a sign for a developmental property, and something piques her interest. Something looks really familiar. But that's when Jet Black yells, there's a ship here. Somebody must have taken Spike. And somebody definitely did take Spike. It was Gren, Anna's second in command. Anna had bugged Vicious's two cronies, so she knew where Spike was going to be. But Spike can't figure out why Anna did this because she has rules about getting involved. And that's when Anna reveals that she feels guilty for what's going on with Spike because of the fact that she was the one who gave Vicious the location of where Spike and Julia were supposed to take off together. Spike doesn't blame her for it, saying, he put a katana through your leg. It's understandable. Anybody would have broken. Spike vows to find Vicious and make him pay for it. Anna tells him, find Julia first. She still loves you. Spike's a little confused and asks, does she know? And they both tell him, yeah, she knows. She figured it out. But the trio are interrupted when Jet Black and Faye come storming into the nightclub with guns drawn. Jet Black was able to figure out where Spike was taken by looking up the equivalent of Space Easy Pass. Spike, however, talks everybody down from their guns, letting both groups know they're with me, and oh, that group over there, they're also with me. And after everybody puts their guns away, Jet Black gives Spike a big hug because he really thought he lost them. Faye ends up asking what happened to that psychopath, and Spike tells her, I killed him. Jet Black's cell phone then goes off, and he has to take it because it's Kimmy. But it's not. It's actually Alyssa telling him that Kimmy was taken by the syndicate. As soon as he gets off the phone, he jacks Spike up, yelling, who are you? The syndicate kidnapped Kimmy, and they want to exchange her for you. Except the thing is, they didn't call you Spike, they called you Fearless. So once again, who are you, and why does the syndicate want to use my daughter to get to you? And that's when Spike has to come clean about who he really is. Jet Black is so upset that he tells Spike, I'm going to kill you myself. But Spike reminds him, you can, but if you don't hand me over to Vicious, he's going to kill Kimmy. Jet Black ends up taking Spike to his car and letting him know that Vicious wants to do the transfer at the fish market. As Spike starts to explain how they might be able to get around this, Jet Black punches him and throws him in the trunk. Faye is kind of mortified at how Jet is acting. She yells at him, we can get her back if we work together. And he yells, you think I'm going to risk my daughter's life on the word of Spike Spiegel? And that's when Faye tells him that she's not willing to help then. Because while Fearless or Spike or whatever his name is might be a dick, he risked his life for her. And she's pretty positive that he risked his life for Jet many, many times. And just like with his beef with Faye, his beef with Spike is the fact that he lied and he never came clean. But that still doesn't sit well with Faye, and she walks away. So as Jet Black escorts Spike to the fish market, Vicious's men are escorting Julia there as well. When Vicious came back, they got into a big fight, and Vicious vowed to hurt Julia in ways that aren't even imaginable. But she won't be alone because she'll be with Fearless's head. As they're driving over there, though, Julia starts whispering in the one's ear that Vicious is never going to let her live because she's one of the few people that knows why Vicious tried to kill Fearless. The guard asks, "Did you ever even love Vicious?" And Julia says, "I thought I did. And then I realized I didn't know what love was. That is, until Fearless." So the guard says, "Then you should be with him." And she chokes out the driver and shoots the passenger. The car flips, but Julie is able to get out of it. So Julie's going to be a little bit late to this meeting. Jet Black, however, is very punctual. He shows up on time. And there's Vicious along with a bunch of his hitmen or guards, whatever you want to call them. Jet Black tells them that Spike is in the trunk, so Vicious sends in his people to go unlock the trunk. But as soon as the key unlocks it, Jet Black yells, "Spike, now!" And Spike bursts through the trunk, and they both light up all of Vicious's people. But when they go to shoot Vicious, the bullet goes right through him. And that's when they realize it's a hologram. And Vicious kind of figured that this might be the case, so he had backup guards ready to just take them in. They end up taking both Spike and Jet Black to a church, tying them up, beating them up pretty good, to the point where Jet Black ends up going unconscious. He does eventually wake up, though, and Spike lets him know that he woke up in enough time to see his execution. He then tells Jet, "Thank you for changing your mind on me." But the relationship is not hunky-dory. Jet Black is still very pissed off at Spike. Vicious then enters the church with a bunch of goons. Jet Black yells at him, "Where's Kimmy? If you hurt her..." And Vicious cuts him off and says, "Hurt her? I would never hurt a kid." He then says to his henchman, "Bring the girl." And Jet Black starts profusely saying thank you, but then Vicious just starts laughing. He gets close to Jet Black and says, "You really think I'm going to let her go?" Jet Black starts cursing out Vicious, and Vicious ends up breaking his leg. He then gets close to Spike and says, "Ever since I learned you were alive, all I could think about was putting you in the grave. You were supposed to be my brother." And Spike tells him, "I was supposed to kill you, and I'm not going to make that mistake again." At this point, Kimmy has been brought to Jet Black, and she's terrified, as is Jet. Spike is trying to wiggle his way out of this one to save them both, but he can't. Vicious grabs Spike's face and turns it to Jet Black and says, "Now you're going to watch your partner and his brat die first." But that's when Faye Valentine swoops in and saves the day. She's riding a ship and lighting up the church with bullets. She's such a good shot that she's actually able to shoot the rope that has Jet and Spike tied up. The one person she wasn't able to kill, though, is Vicious. He was able to get away. Spike picks Kimmy up because Jet Black's leg is pretty messed up. One of the hitmen who was barely breathing ends up shooting Spike in the back. So now they're both pretty banged up. They end up walking out of the church, though, over to Faye. Faye ends up loading both Kimmy and Jet Black into her ship, but Spike says, "I can't. I have unfinished business here." Faye ends up flying Jet Black and Kimmy to the Bebop. That's where Alyssa and Chalmers ends up picking her up. And it's especially tough for Jet Black when Kimmy looks at Chalmers and says, "Daddy, I want to go home." But Kimmy isn't the only person to leave him that day. So does Faye. Faye had gone back and looked at the VHS tape, and her suspicion was right. When she saw the development plan, one of the street signs looked really familiar, and it's the street sign that she grew up on. So she wants to go search that lead down and find out if she can learn more about her previous life. When she tells Jet Black, though, is pretty despondent because of everything that happened with Kimmy. She ends up giving him a hug and saying goodbye. But back at the church, Spike walks in and finds Vicious pretty quickly. The two get into a fight, Vicious with his katana and Spike with a gun. They both end up inflicting damage on the other. Spike ends up getting stabbed in the shoulder, and Vicious ends up getting shot in the stomach. There's one gun, though, lying in between both of them. When Spike goes to grab it, Vicious is able to get it first, and now Vicious has Spike dead to rights. And that's when Vicious gets shot, because Julia has finally shown up in the nick of time. Vicious isn't dead, though. He's just badly injured. Julia ends up walking up to Spike and saying, "It's true. I can't believe you're alive." And Spike tells her, "I've thought about you endlessly." But she asks, "Then why didn't you come for me? Why did you leave me with him?" And that's when from the corner you hear Vicious start chuckling. And then he tells her, "It's because I told him that you had chosen me." And Julia asks Spike, "You actually believed him?" Spike says, "I shouldn't have, and I'm sorry for that, but now we can make it right. We can be free of the syndicate." But she cuts him off and says, "Why would I want to be free of it? I finally captured the throne. With the elders dead and the capos gone, all that's in the way of controlling the syndicate is him. The syndicate will finally be ours." She hands Fearless the gun and says, "Do it." But he says, "No, I told you. I don't want that life anymore." And she screams, but what about what I want? Because I'm done being scared. And Spike says, Julie, this isn't you. And she fires back, you made me who I am. When you left me with him to fend for myself, this is what became of me. Spike tells her, I loved you and I never stopped loving you. She says, that may be, but it's clear now. You were nothing more than a dream that I needed to wake up from. And she shoots Spike. And just like the last time, Spike ends up falling into a river. Although this time, it's at the hands of Julia, not because of Julia. Julia ended up taking Vicious back to Mal's refinery and chaining him up. He tries to tough talk her, saying that he's in charge of the syndicate, but she reminds him, you're an elder now, and no one is allowed to see the elders. So all I have to do is speak on your behalf. She then puts one bullet in her gun, but when she pulls the trigger, it doesn't go off. It scares the hell out of Vicious, and she says, maybe we'll try again later, and leaves him there, screaming for help. Spike also didn't die. He actually makes his way back to the Bebop, where he finds Jet Black just as Faye left him, depressed. Jet tells Spike the only reason you're still alive is because you helped save Kimmy. Your buddy Vicious was right. Death follows you wherever you go. If I ever see you again, I will kill you. And then he heads on to the Bebop. With nowhere to go, Spike goes to a bar. He gets pretty lit up and eventually ends up passing out in the alley. But he's awoken by a girl that clearly needs to be on Ritalin, who is accompanied by a dog. We don't know if it's Jet Black's dog or not. What we do know is this girl recognizes Spike and wants to hire him because she has a bounty for somebody called the Butterfly Man. She also starts screaming about someone named Villaggio, but Spike just wants her to shut up. And that is how Season 1 of Cowboy Bebop ends. I really enjoyed it. I'm not going to apologize for it. I didn't see the original. I'm not going to nitpick because it wasn't the original. Ignorance is bliss. But feel free to tell me in the comment section why it sucks. And speaking of the comment section, I don't read it because it's usually a cesspool. So if you ask a question or even give me a compliment and I don't get back to you, don't take it personally. Please consider subscribing to the channel. Hit thumbs up if you actually did like the video. Smash that thumbs down button if you thought it was terrible. And if you know anyone who needs a recap of Season 1, please consider sending it to them. I'd appreciate it. But once again, thank you so much for watching.